So here we go. This is episode 25.
It's our third anniversary, or second anniversary even. Second
Don't do
anniversary,
that
the
to me. I'm
start of our third year.
already stuck with the timing thing, so second anniversary. Blimey, that must be why I'm wearing a different shirt. Anyway, basically, hello everybody. How you doing? We're talking about overwhelm tonight and the chimp brain. You may have heard of this and you may not. But before I get totally sucked into the chimp brain and just have fun, let's introduce everybody, shall we? So we'll start with our new member. May as well put you right in there, in the deep end. Tony, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, my name's Tony Gordon. Company's name is Change Your Mind Limited. From East Kilbride, which is just south of Glasgow. I'm a growth mindset coach. Basically, I'm a coach and hypnotherapist. I work with both individuals and groups, empowering them to make changes in their lives by giving them new resources and new techniques, processes to educate them and how they can start move themselves forward in their lives, just taking those first steps towards their goals and aspirations.
Cool. Angela.
I'm Angela. I'm an energetic transformational coach, which means I use a whole bunch of different technologies. So I will use techniques even. I will use hypnotherapy. I will use kinesiology. I will use coaching. And I work at the moment with people who are at that point where they're just about at burnout. I'd love to catch them before they get there because nobody ever wants to go there. So people who are verging towards burnout is who I'm currently working with. And the beauty of the techniques that I've got, you don't have to always talk about it. So if it's one of those ones that you just don't know how to verbalize, we can get to the bottom of it without talking.
I need to talk to you then, because every time anybody asks me what I do, I kind of find it difficult to verbalise what it's all going on. So, Willie.
My name's Willie Nicol, and basically, same as what Tony said, that's me. No, I'm looking at
the cloning machine is starting to work.
I'm a personal development life coach, transformation, change your mindset, change your life, change your way of thinking, change your life. So my business is currently called Contentment Life Coaching, soon to change when my new website finally appears. And talking of overwhelm, I've got a list of about 20 things I need to do with the website, the emails and the blah, blah, blah. So I'm getting a wee bit like that myself. However, glad to be here and happy to talk about overwhelm.
Thank you. Mary.
Well, I'm actually over in Ireland. So I'm Mary Corbett. I'm in Ireland. And I coach as well. Surprise, surprise. And the people I coach are the people who are overwhelmed and who have lots of that chatter going on in their heads that really is not helping them. And I'll work with them and help them find an even keel and deliver their best work. That's me.
Yes. Dave. What's the buzz?
Well, hi everybody, I'm Dave Sleet. I'm a psychological coach and the author of The Psychological Hive, which was the product of 22 years of research into the most successful companies and the most successful people, and what are the elements that exist in both groups. And if it doesn't exist in both groups, it didn't make the cut. So looking at why are those companies or those individuals the most successful, stand out consistently, comes down to their mindset, and that's the psychological hive mindset.
Thank you. And I'm Leslie Marsh, and today I think I'll go with the Mary Poppins carpet bag of magical myriad things that can happen when people come to you for little things that are niggling them, but actually that's just what's on the surface. Stick your hand in that bag and you don't know what's going to come out. But we can do that in a certain way, without any content, and actually look at how we can change patterns. Which, when you're talking about carpet bags, that's probably a good thing. So, let's get started. We're going to talk about overwhelm and the monkey brain. Some people call it the chimp brain. There is a very famous book, The Chimp Paradox, which I actually have on my Audible thingy, but I'm still learning about why I don't do what I know I should do. I think that's got something to do with monkey brain too. What does it mean to you, Willie?
Well, I've started the Chimp Paradox 2 times, Professor Steve Peters, I believe. And I've got maybe a third to half a way through and stopped both times. Because I like what he's saying, but he seems to repeat it quite a lot. And I've a very low boredom threshold. So that's why I kind of gave up. But it's actually sitting beside me on another table, which I can't put my hand on. Overwhelm. To me, it's like having a little hamster in a wheel inside your head. You all see the wee hamster running furiously in the hamster wheel. And I equate that to the thoughts in our hamster wheel going round and round and round, getting quicker and quicker and even more confusing. And it's learning how to stop the hamster wheel, get off the hamster wheel and take a breath. So again, that's to me, overwhelm is where it's just all going on in your head. Like one of my clients came to me and said, "Can you stop the noise in my head?" And I said, "Yes, I can." And we did. So that's where I'm kind of at with overwhelm.
Yeah, I'm remembering watching hamsters go round the wheel. They never quite figured out how to stop it without being flipped out of it. Because they always decided to, oh, my little legs can't go any faster, but the wheel's going faster than my little legs can go. And suddenly they were flying hamsters. And that's actually quite a lot like what happens, isn't it, Mary?
I think it is. And I think that the deceptive thing is, I think for a lot of people, it creeps up on them. Because we have this wonderful, you're busy and it's supposed to be somehow a good thing, and you're working really hard and that's supposed to be a good thing, and you're getting the pay increases and you're getting the performance bonuses and you're getting the praise and you're getting everything else, and you're going, and all of it is completely feeding this, you must go faster and faster and faster. And I think the overwhelm creeps in and you don't have time to reflect because you're too busy. I don't usually see people who are overwhelmed who aren't busy. Now, I'm not saying they don't exist, but in my experience, the people I deal with, they're always very busy, and it's trying to get them, they don't have time to reflect, and they genuinely don't believe they have time to reflect or to stop or to get off. So I think I worry. I'd be like, Angela was saying at the beginning, I'd like to meet people before they get burnt out. We don't really want to get that far. And I think with overwhelm, we want to get to people before they hit that massive crisis of overwhelm. But the way we engineer working lives, it can be very hard to get to them in time. And it tends to be a bigger problem. We don't give people the skills early enough to know that they can hop up. They can actually take a little break, and they can, like as if they were on a skateboard, they could break a little bit every now and again, and that'll be a good thing for them.
Yeah, it's a bit like giving a chimp a box of matches, isn't it? Like the blue touch papers done a while back. Yeah. See what happens. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I love the analogy of the hamster wheel, because it's so much like it, right? When it stops, they actually fall off. They don't seem to be able to step off. And a lot of it is because there's people who don't know how to say no. That's one of the biggest problems with it, is we never know how to say no. And what Mary was saying was right, is that the reason I think it becomes that bad before they realise it is because they think all the time they have to keep pleasing people. And there's also a fear factor. If you say no, someone will overtake you, or there's someone better than you in that position. So it's a simple little word, NO. And if we could just teach people to do that more often, they would get what Mary's looking for, having the pauses. So it fits in perfect with that as well.
I have a lovely experience of teaching people to say no without using the word no. Yes, it's been much cleaner if you just say no, but that's too big a jump, and you kind of have to teach them to say no without using the word no. It's great fun. And when they master it, they suddenly realize there are ways of saying no that I can actually feel safe with, until they get to the point where they can actually be clean. Say, well, actually, no, this doesn't suit me right now.
I think sometimes also the saying no part is about likability. People tend to think that they're not going to someone's not going to like them if they tell them no.
Yeah.
It's very people pleasing, which, comes into your ballywhack quite happily. But Dave, I want to talk a little bit about the hive mind in this as well, because that's got to do with the social aspect of whether or not we're a team player.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that kind of strikes me when this conversation comes up generally, a lot of people will find the analogy of the hamster wheel. And it's really easy for us to do that because it's not a human. When we look at the vast majority of anyone who goes through Western education, they come out with a tick box mindset. Create a list, go through those tick lists, and you will get to where you want to achieve. But by the time you get halfway through your list, your target's already out of date. So you're forever creating a new list to try and achieve something that is going to be out of date by the time you get there. Then you've got an entrepreneurial mindset. And this is where the vast majority of people that will be paying attention to this kind of conversation will fall. And that mindset is almost an elevation on the education mindset. But it's like riding a unicycle. You have to keep pedaling. Now, this is human. We're not talking about another species now in a hamster wheel. We're talking about us. We're talking about what we do in order to keep surviving. And if you're on a unicycle, you have to keep pedaling. Forwards, backwards, sideways is irrelevant, because if you don't, you fall over. And this is where that fear that Tony was speaking about comes into play, because we know that if we stop pedaling, we will fall over. So we do it, we just keep going. And there are coaches that work specifically, and I'm not referencing anyone in this room, but there are coaches that work with that mindset and they keep people in it, but they're moving them from a unicycle to a bicycle. And the thing with that is that you cannot have a really successful business or a really successful operation in a space age if you're riding something from 200 years ago. That's the mindset that we're driving.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, talking about another analogy is the airplane analogy. When the oxygen mask comes down, you've got to take it for yourself. And we keep using that with people and saying, you can't drink from an empty cup. You've got to, you can't give anybody else anything from an empty cup. You've got to look after yourself first. But that's the thing. We have been historically taught that we have to give.
We've been groomed into that. Our education system for 280 years has told us that.
And it's selfish to not do that. Instead of looking at it as looking after yourself, it's attacked as being selfish. How can you not do that? Because a lot of the times too, I don't know about you guys, but I see it in people who understand that there's going to be one person in the group who's going to be the runner, who's going to be running around like a blue-arsed fly, absolutely just disappearing off that wheel 5 or 6 times a day, because their to-do list is longer than Santa Claus's naughty list.
Yeah. And the thing that I found in the research was that the most successful businesses, the most successful individuals, they understand the difference between a reaction and a response. And they know that there is within all of us a processing time frame of going from the reaction to the response. The vast majority of us, and that chimp brain keeps us trapped in that reaction phase. So when we're trapped and we can't get to the response because we're reacting, it's a bit like throwing a hand grenade into a firework factory and expecting that we're not going to have explosions. And the most successful people know that getting to that response phase is much better for them, for those around them, and their collaborations and their connections. And they work on that more than they work on the reaction.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, please don't try and put a hand grenade in a fireworks factory. Don't do that. It's not good.
Yeah, it's a bad idea.
Or anywhere.
Or anywhere. No. See a grenade, go and get somebody who knows what they're doing with it, not you.
Just that's what they're doing with the hand grenade in the first place.
Yes.
Yeah.
As you back away slowly.
You want to...
Don't do it slowly. It's only a 7-second fuse. How far can you get in 7 seconds?
Actually, it's a longer fuse than sometimes the monkey brain is when it comes to overwhelm, because it becomes that the only place left to go. Angela, do you think that basically when we are looking at someone who's teetering on the brink, is there a point where we could actually catch them before they lemming-like throw themselves off that cliff?
Don't see why not.
So what would we do?
How long's a piece of string? It all depends on all these different aspects. So if you get them early enough, you can teach them how to dismount and get off that bike or off that unicycle. So you're not going to end up flat on your back and bruised and all the rest of it. With the oxygen mask, it's almost teaching people that it's not the impact on you, it's the impact on other people. So if you don't put your oxygen mask on, you then become a casualty. You then become somebody that needs to rely on other people. Then you're then putting people out. And it's remarkable how quickly that can shift people's thought processes from being that people pleaser to suddenly, well, actually, if I'm going to be a burden, I better put that mask on first because I don't want to be a burden. So that's a really interesting mindset shift as well. But I think it totally depends on the circumstances. And we've all got different tools and techniques in all of our toolkits that deal with these different things. But it's about being available and being ready to have those conversations or being ready to do whatever techniques. So perhaps what we need to be doing is making sure that people know that we exist, that the friends of the people that are going through these problems know that we exist and how to get in touch with us as quickly as possible. Because they'll see that things are starting to not look quite right with their mums, their dads, their brothers, their sisters, their colleagues, whoever. They'll see that something's not quite right. And it's just about having that awareness to say, I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but how about you go and talk to one of these guys? And actually shift what's going on. Because it is about that different perspective. And I think for a lot of the times when you're actually stuck in it, it's really difficult to see. It's really difficult to see where you're going. So it is about making sure that they know that we're here.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is basically why this all started in the first place. And going back to that criteria, that kind of kick-off spot, COVID and lockdown actually produced more emphasis on the monkey brain for many, many people. A large part of the population in the world at one point was all kind of flight, fright, freeze, not knowing what to do. And we're just coming round to the bend on that one and starting to look at different ways of understanding what's going on. However, the reactions, the reactive responses to that situation and the decisions that were made are also causing a lot of issues for people at the moment, because some of them decided they were never going to go back to work again. They were going to go and do something else, go and contemplate their navel somewhere, or start, doing something that they always wanted to do when they were children, but not having the backup or the understanding of how that was going to happen.
But I think you've also got the other side of it, of the people whose lives didn't change, the people who were still going out to work, the people that were still having to perform all their duties. And they were then ending up in that overwhelmed state because they've suddenly got this extra fear added into their day-to-day life. Well, I can't go and sit in the house and do nothing. And Joe Blogs down the street, they might be feeling a bit rubbish that they've been told that they've got to go on furlough and they've got a slight pay cut. But they get to sit and chill out. I've still got to get out of my bed every morning. And it's those people that then felt, and I can't complain about it because my life's not changed. So they then started to internalize it more and more and more.
And you've got the outside world with its 24-hour news cycle that lasts all of about 14 minutes, continually telling you exactly what the same thing. You're caught on that loop of knowledge. And when you've got an infrastructure and a leadership system all around the world, I'm not just, this isn't just, the UK, where the communication of circumstances and knowledge did not have the trust, did not have the understanding, and it sure didn't have the belief of anybody that was receiving that information. Everybody then goes into survival mode. And as you say, it amplifies the chimp brain because it's the only thing that's getting fed. So no one can get to a response. No one can get an even kill. And you end up with a situation where, as you say, we're turning that corner now. On the horizon, it is being estimated that there is another scenario that we are going to have to manage, but no one trusts, understands, or believes the communication that's coming from the support systems. So the possibility to contain, control, and survive is going to be a lot less than it was 2 years ago, because people have lost faith in it all.
And I guess there's that aspect that the media in historical times, or historically, has always been sensationalism, because that's what sells the papers. That's what sells the people to actually switch the TV on and watch it. I don't believe that sensationalism has shifted,
No.
which, because people have then been hooked to it 24/7, has created so much more overwhelm and so much less trust. But people are still glued to watching it, even if they don't believe it, and it's still going in, and it's still building and building, and that chimp is just going crazy, and it's not helpful.
I think it's compounded. It's not as if, everybody was having the same rate of impact. Some people, quite sensibly, were switching off the news so they didn't hear it and giving themselves breaks. Some people left the office and discovered, oh, I'm gone out of that toxic work environment. It's wonderful, and discover themselves again. Some people discovered they didn't have spouses that they actually liked spending too much time with. Everybody has had a very different combination and is at a very different place. So our awareness that every time we have to keep checking where on that overwhelm spectrum is the person that we're talking with, because everybody has had we were never all in the same boat. We were all in the same storm. People's experiences have been very, very different. Their processing has been different. Their reaction stroke response has been different. So the sensitivity and that finely tuned ear to actually hear where somebody is when we get to talk to them is so important right now. And there's no one answer.
I think we've kind of really eclectically discovered just how inflexible all of our working systems have been, because they've never been under pressure or they haven't been under this level of pressure in nearly 80 years.
But the one thing also that we've got is that we have not been able to, through the situations that we were in, actually act like human beings, because we weren't allowed to touch, we weren't allowed to hug, we weren't allowed to be social and keep our family units. So, and community, Tony, you do a lot of work in community sectors, so you will know as well also about and so will you, Willie, being a former police person, that communities and the social aspect of that, the hive aspect of it, is that there's power there, and there's trust, and there's belief, and there's comfort there. We actually had almost lifted out and taken away. So that kind of lost us a lot of places, didn't it?
There's a lot of people, the opposite side, that's come out of the work environment, and the isolation has become more than they can handle. And the reason it's caused a lot of the overwhelm is because they were part of a hive mind, a collective mind, and a work. So when they had an issue, you had someone to rely on, maybe someone sitting next to you, across from you, whatever, they could talk it through with. Zoom and Skype and all the Teams, all these other things that came around, the one thing it lacks there is interpersonal conversations. Because when you're on a team one, only the two people can speak. You can't have everybody talking at one time. We lost that part of the collective side that people had, that took part of their personality away. And now they often find the opposite. Now that comes, they're saying to them, well, they're putting out all these what would you say, like questionnaires. How do you want to work in future? Do you want a hybrid environment? Do you want it 3 days in, 2 days out, 2 days out, 3 in, whatever it is, or full in the office or full out? People are totally confused because they were so worried about becoming isolated, but now they've got so used to that fact, they're finding the difficulty is the overwhelm's coming. What if I've got to go back in? I look different. How do I act different with people? I don't know if I'll act the same with the people. I've not done that for 2 years. And it's causing a lot of people more overwhelmed than they would have had if they could just actually say to me, say, okay, why don't you have little breakout rooms or having time of the day where you have time out with the people like you used to do when you walked in and go and get a coffee with each other, or you went to a machine for something. People don't have that interaction. So you're right, Leslie, a lot of it is the personal interaction or interpersonal skills. People are actually losing at the moment or concerned about that.
They're talking about children's education set back decades or whatever it is because of the lack of interaction.
Yeah.
If you ask a child, have they stopped learning? The short answer is no. What they've stopped doing is learning in a classroom. And this is where I think the education system in the Western world really holds itself to its Victorian roots, because it believes that the only way a child is going to learn is in a classroom between 9 and 3 and between Monday and Friday. And when you look outside of that matrix, more is learned, or more has been learned about the world in the last 2 years by anyone who's been caught in that sausage machine than has been learned outside of that time. And what they've learned is that the adults don't know how to fix stuff. What they've learned is that the systems are broken. What they've learned is how to survive in that environment. And if the adults and the educators are going to go, do you know what, we've got to get you back in the sausage machine and force you back down, you've got to do it our way, we've got an entire generation of kids that are going to turn around and go, well, your system don't work. And it's going to backfire.
It's true though. Once you take the sleeping bag out of the little holder thing, you never get it back in quite successfully. You know, because we actually change with our environments, don't we, Willie? We actually go in there, and because this is what we're doing now, is we're dealing with the fallout of this to a certain extent. But we've been practicing dealing with that for a long time through what we do. And you've seen a lot more of the two sides of community than many of us have.
Right, so but the point I was making there, Dave, was that it wasn't so much the education as in learning, it was the soft skills, interpersonal skills, interaction, when to put your fists up, when not to put your fists up, and so on and so forth. And you're right, the education system. I mean, I once went on a school trip with my previous wife, who was a teacher, to Italy, and the kids go from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Monday to Saturday. They still make up the hours, but it gives them all the afternoons free, and then they can go and do what they like, which I thought was a great idea. I was just wondering how we'd get Scottish kids to rock up and get to school for 8 o'clock, but that's another story. I think
you start the day later. You work. This is what I think our system is so stuck in what it was told 280 years ago that it can't adjust. It can't even contemplate that there is a different way of doing this. We know that at different ages, the mind works at different time frames during the day. So if we flexed our education system for those younger pupils who were active earlier in the morning and flexed it later in the day for those that were older, then you've got more kids that are actually engaging when their brain is engaging. You're going to get more engagement by definition.
Although, interestingly enough, who's going to teach them if that person who's teaching them's brain doesn't work that way at that time in the morning?
Thanks, Les. I was going to say that because also the thing, you know, we've got an amazing opportunity here. And what Dave said, I love about the fact that education is, but it's not only the structure, it's the curriculum. They both go hand in hand, they're both wrong. We've got a challenge at the moment to teach kids life skills. So when these things ever happen again, they know how to deal with that. The things that we all do, or we work with other people to do. But getting kids young enough means they won't have issues as they get older. But Leslie and I work a lot with kids and that, especially with 16 to 20, 21-year-old girls. And either from suicide ideation or they've already attempted suicide. And a lot of that in the last couple of years has came about because of this, because not having the friends there. I thought that's what Willie was going to allude to. You sort of mentioned that it's not only the education bit that's been wrong the last few years, it's interpersonal skills. You think of age groups you think of kids then between 2, 6, 7 years old, they just learn about the world's about. They learn about the right and wrong in the world. And they learn a lot of that, especially when they start going to nursery or go to school. They've not had that, a lot of them, to be able to learn those things. Then they get a wee bit older and they start from 7 to 12, probably 11, 12 years old. You know, as they start to learn then about the whole world. What is it? All these emotions, the feelings before they become teenagers, and then they just become uncontrollable. So they get to an age they need to understand those things to give them a start. We've had kids that's missing out on that. That's the generations that's been hurt at the moment. More than you're right, the education system is one thing that needs to be looked at, but the curriculum as well as the structure. Teach them what's relevant now. Teach them what the world's about now. What's happened in the last couple of years and the type of help that people have needed means that these kids need to learn that, but they also need to learn how to have interpersonal skills when you're not at the classroom all the time, or you're not on an open playground, or you're not playing football. They need to still have that contact with people, because that's how their brains develop. And if we don't do that, we restrict them. That's where the gap's going to come in the education system.
Socially and psychologically, though, as well, what we've lost a lot of in the last couple of years is the ritual of how life and death works, and how to grieve. And we have never really been good in the West with the grieving situation anyway, because we've been running away from the idea of death from day dot, to tell the truth. Whereas in other continents, it's not the same at all. It's a natural progression and it's not feared. So their idea of how things were working was taken one way. Our idea of how it was working, it was all fear. It was all freeze, freeze, freeze. It was all no, no, no. I don't want to know. You know, and the watching of the television programs and the news was all about how many died. How many died? Nobody actually thought of explaining that to children to a certain extent, and understanding that it's absolutely natural for that to happen, particularly for people who are older or people who are, you know, but it was useful.
The groundwork for that information to be put in just doesn't, you know, it's not being put there in the first place. And as you say, you look at cultures outside of the Eurocentric historic model, that is those building blocks are already in place. And when you've got them in place, it's a lot easier to have that connection to those explanations.
We actually dissociated to a certain extent from it, because only X amount of people were allowed at a funeral. Nobody, you know, and allowing people to grieve, allowing people to pay their respects is about closure.
But I find this quite interesting, because in Ireland we had the same very tight regulations as to how many could attend a funeral, how many could attend a wedding. More people were always allowed to attend funerals than weddings, which is an interesting one in Ireland. It was quite. But what we have discovered is that there have been a lot of people learning to find their own way to replace the ritual. So yes, there isn't a Catholic church in Ireland that doesn't now stream funeral masses. So where people cluster, and I'm sure it's somewhat similar in the UK. But what we're discovering is that in Ireland we have a very rich funeral rites. We wake the dead. We celebrate their lives. There's usually a good ritual, and there's usually a fairly good party, really, if in truth be told, where they're remembered and stories are told, which are all part of that ritual and the normal passing of life. But people are now that things have settled down so much, there are regular memorial services for people who died during COVID, because they still have that need, and they just say, to hell with it, we're having it anyway. We're now having another funeral. True, there won't be an open coffin because they're already buried, but there will still be that celebration of their life and the process. So people will very much find their way to adapt. So we'll do it differently, but we're still adapting for the new order of the world. And I think in terms of our children, I think, yes, they've all missed out on various things, but we've also learned how well they adapt. And we're learning that we can actually pay attention to what do we need? How do we build solid skill sets so that we avoid the level of psychological trauma that we were seeing before COVID.
I was just going to say that the bit before COVID, when you've got the kids, we all complained about kids not having actual face-to-face conversations. They did everything behind their devices.
Yep.
Even if the people were sitting at the same table as them, they would text message each other. So that this isn't new. They're just now not beside them as they're text messaging each other. So these challenges were starting to build anyway.
They've been coming for over a decade, because the fastest growing suicide ideation in the UK was prior to us, about 10 years ago. People still say it still is males 45 to 49 years old. 75% of the people taking their life are male at that age group. But the fastest growing area doing it is females from 12 to 24 years old. And that's been since the 2011 check on it. And that's been growing every year since they've been doing it. And that's all down to social media, peer pressure. It's all different things it's been, but it has been highlighted a lot more over the last couple of years. But people look at it as if that was the cause of it. It's not. It's been going on for 12 years.
I'd say it's been going on longer than the 12 years.
Yeah, it's documented. Yeah,
and I would put this back as far as the early 80s with the idea of stranger danger, when we were telling people, don't let your kids play out in the park. Bring them in. They can watch TV. They can do all of the lessons, because, you know, we'll put on educational programs for children and we'll write them so that they've got that. So you had babysitting by TV and you didn't have people going out. You know, but I can remember when curfew was signalled by the street light.
Mm. But I think that's one of the things where we can actually say that, you know, when they do the social histories in 50 years' time, that one of the potential currently exists, that COVID has acted as a major, you know, roadblock. We are now at least having much more coherent and solid conversations about how do we prevent things happening? How do we make people more aware? I think there is a lot of opportunity currently, because everybody recognizes it's been traumatic. Every social agency, government agency is going to say, yeah, we have to put programs in place. That now is the real opportunity, that, you know, teaching people how to recognize when they're heading to overwhelm, when they're heading to being too busy. We have huge potential right now because there is an awareness that it's necessary. The world has fundamentally changed.
My concern with that is that we end up coming full circle back to Dave's earlier comment of a checkbox exercise.
Yeah, and this is the amazing thing. In human history, this is not the first time this has happened.
No.
Okay. Pandemics, every single time they've hit our species, have been an amplifier for the good, the bad, and the indifferent. Every single time. I think this is the time where the mental health arena has got the best opportunity out of every other occasion in history to be able to put on that aspiration rather than the correction of the negative. Because we're so used to, oh, you're having a hard time. If you can't speak to me, go and speak to so-and-so, right? We've done that. We tried that for the last 80 years. It hasn't worked. We need to be able to show people the examples of where the different mindset has given different achievement. And if the different achievement is the successes of those companies that work in a different way, that don't have that educational mindset, don't have that keep peddling, that burnout kind of infrastructure, that's the aspiration. If we want that, then we've got to put the ingredients in that get them that. We can't keep building the same thing with the same broken bricks and expect the house to stand up. And this is where the most successful people and their mindset and the way they work and the way their businesses operate, that's the aspiration. And now's the opportunity to show people you don't have to burn out, because if you look at that way of working, the roadmap's already there for you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel 74,000 times a week.
So really, we're actually societally in the arena of the first monkey, going back to the chimpanzee brain, but going back to the idea of using the first tool, of understanding that there is a tool there, that there is something, the key that is we can use, instead of immediately doing the amygdala thing and just kicking off fear, run, or freeze, and just don't do anything. There was always going to be one monkey who comes out and says, oh, hang on a minute. That's different. I want to be curious about that. And I think that's what you're saying, Dave, is that basically we've had an amputation of curiosity and individuality in that department for a long time. However, this arena that we're in at the moment is actually ripe with that curiosity and with that, but it has to be the right key at the right time. And the other monkeys have to be looking and learning about it and how they use it.
It was
And I
inevitable
think-
that
I think to kind of get that analogy to the zenith, if you like, the species is now looking. The species is going, oh my God, we've survived. Now what? What is there? What do we do now? How do we make sure that what was broken before stays broken in the past and not broken in the future?
But this is it. We need to get out of survival mode.
But it was inevitable we'd end up in survival mode. Like overwhelm, fear, terror, given the misinformation, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, I could call it outright fucking lies, that was peddled to us by the decision makers. So they hold a lot of responsibility for the state some people get into. We're told you could do this or couldn't do that. And if you did do what you were told, you were a pariah. You were an outlaw, if you like. The people became very confused. So some people were out banging drums for the NHS, fair enough. Other people were breaking the law right, left and centre. We'll not name names. So people became extremely confused. And without that clear direction, and okay, a very complicated set of circumstances with many, many moving parts, that confusion led to overwhelm and fear and anxiety and worry. And it became so endemic that it was very difficult to get out of. And how we get to that point, Dave, where we say, yeah, we do have an opportunity here. If there is the will and the impetus to make a better job out of a bad lot, if you like. But I think that there has to be truth, honesty, openness, transparency, whatever it is, which has been singularly lacking over the past 2 years. And all the mental health, I don't like using mental health. I don't like the phrase. Mental wellness or mental well-being issues are a result of this, miasma of facts, figures, truths, untruths.
The sad fact, Willie, is that in all of this, because everybody knew that was what was going on, everybody in the psychological arena could see that is what is being pumped into the world. But because certainly in the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, Europe, the mental health system, for whichever way round you want to dress that, did not stand up in one voice and say, stop. You are creating the perfect storm for the catastrophe. There were voices, I'm not saying there weren't voices that were saying that, but it wasn't collective, it wasn't pulled together, and despite best efforts of a lot of people, they were shouted down by the mental health system itself because of its own self-interest. And this is what has to change to get us out of survival mode as a species. The one sector that the NHS has consistently said is needed in order for that to happen is the psychological arena.
But the emphasis was always on the physical well-being. Your social distancing, you're wearing a mask. And as far as I can see, very little thought was given to the implications of that physical emphasis. what about the mental side of things? Well, we'll worry about that in a minute. Once we get zero COVID, and that'll be all right on the night. And quite clearly, that is a short-sighted strategy that is, the chickens have come home to roost.
That was mollification, though. That was a case of, we'll tell them it's going to be all right and this thing's going to go away, because that'll give us...
We'll tell them this is only for 21 days. This is 3 weeks. We'll do this. We'll get this sorted. We'll be back to normal in 3 weeks. That was the very first set of messages that came out. And guess what happened 3 weeks later? We'll do it again for another 3 weeks. And we kept going. That 3 week window was repeated 6 times in the UK.
But now we're dealing with the fallout from that, the collateral damage, and that's what we need to be thinking about, is the fact that we're here specifically because we are about the mind and the power of the mind to heal and to make things different. It's the patterns that we run in our minds that we need to re-educate, that we need to actually re-strategize. So while we're all doing this and talking about this and going down the chimpanzee brain and getting into it and getting a stick and hitting at it all the time, what we need to be doing is sitting back on our haunches and actually contemplating it a little bit more and allowing people to understand that where there's stillness, then that will attract what needs to be happening. That will attract people who are not still to find out and be curious as to how that's happening. So the one thing in Overwhelm that I'm thinking, I believe, is the most difficult thing to do is to find comfort.
Find peace.
Yeah, because the mind's too busy.
Quiet. I thought today about changing the letters in quiet from Q-U-I-E-T to Q-U-Y-E-T, which is quit upsetting yourself. Everything's terrific. And if you look at that, no, everything is not terrific. If you stop and think for a minute, there's probably a lot more terrificness going about than the lack of it. We focus on the negative because we're hardwired to focus on negativity. And we stop looking at, look at all the positives here. Look at the things I have to be grateful for. We can just take a moment, smell the coffee, smell the roses or whatever. And that's a very simplistic way of getting that message across. It doesn't necessarily have to be all doom and gloom. Yes, people have died. I have friends who have died. And funerals, no. But there is the opportunity, as Dave said, is it's not all going to be sunshine and roses, right? But the opportunity is there if we can grasp it. If we just take a time to take a breath, right? Get off the hamster wheel and contemplate the positives that are there in front of us.
Look for something else to actually run round instead of a wheel.
But whatever.
Also, the other thing is that we do not want to do is the Scarlett O'Hara energy. We don't want to be going, I'll think about it tomorrow. We want to actually find a safe space where we can actually think about it in time, on time.
I think there's also that part where we don't necessarily feel as if we have permission to stop and think about it, because in some industries, in some organizations and mindset groups, you have the challenge where it's a badge of honor to be in overwhelm. It's a badge of honor to be busy, because if you're not busy, then you're not working at your best. And it's that side of it of, oh, how many people are going to burn out? Why is she upset working to 10 o'clock at night when everybody else is still working to 10 o'clock at night? It's that piece of having the compassion for those around you that aren't coping as well. But while you're trying to address it, and not address it necessarily, but while you're trying to identify it, so you can say, do you know what? Come and have a coffee. Let's just take that pause. And I think it's not just the people that are going through it that we really need to be educating, if that's even the right word. It's everyone to say, I'm going to keep an eye out. And that's been more difficult because we're not sitting beside them in the office and things like that aren't happening. But hopefully everyone's still got at least some line of communication open, even if they're not sitting beside you at a desk.
It's true. It's a case of, it's blinkers. We're so focused on it, particularly when we've got these boxes. That's our focus. We tend to, peripherally wise, when we're focusing on this, We know there's something else around there, but it's all in the same place. It's all doing what it always does until it doesn't do it anymore.
It's like blankety blank without the fun.
Or the Muppet Show, whichever one you want to go with.
It's like tiles are us. All people know is what's in it. So they want that wee tile, and everything matter what's in there. But I think, the right education is still one of the biggest things. But this, what I was saying earlier about the chance for curriculums to change. So we need to do that as well, is to educate the ones for looking at work. How many people here have been in a work environment and you get a health and risk assessment done every year? And they come and see if you sit at your desk, okay, right, how's your posture, how's your arms, how you sit, we need to do this. When do you ever ask you how mentally, how emotionally are you feeling? That it's a health and safety risk assessment. Health does not come just as physical. Health is both parts. You need the mind and body together to make it. And the one thing I loved that Willie said earlier is to get away from this word mental health, it's emotional health. Because if you look at the actual facts, worry, yes, starts it all off. We got worry now, that's in your mind. But the worry turns to stress. The stress is a physiological part of your body that does it before we get to anxiety. So when we get anxiety or we get depression, from the medical world or the DSM, they suddenly class it then as a mental health issue or a mental illness issue. But they've actually, the definition of it is it's not. It's a physiological and a psychological issue put together. Yeah. So why do we not have simple things each time as a health and safety risk assessment that includes both the physical side, the psychological side, the physical side, to make sure we're looking after people in that environment, especially when not in an office?
Tony, I think that there are moves afoot to try to put in, say, that I know there's a lot of roles coming up at the moment on well-being consultants and well-being roles in companies. But I think the point that Angela made earlier is important. The danger is that will be a box-ticking exercise. And I was sitting yesterday talking with a HR head of HR, and I was saying, even the box ticking will probably hit the 80%. You'll hit that 80%, so they get picked. But the real challenge is that this is one situation where we need to get the 20% who are in the real trouble. The 80% will probably be okay anyway. So getting the tick box that will say they're fine is probably, but we need some way. I think we need to stay focused on paying attention to the 20% who will land up in real trouble.
Well, that 20% are not likely to tick the box to say how they're feeling.
No, particularly
because they've either not acknowledged it, or they don't want to appreciate it. They don't want to be targeted.
And they don't want the company to know. They don't want the company to know. They don't want to tell HR.
So this is where the education comes in, because it is. I put something out the other week because I work a lot. I'm trying to work a lot with males, and it's actually hard because they don't come to you. But when I put a post out on LinkedIn, it was quite funny. I put a post out asking why males don't speak it. I put emotional health rather than mental. So I put emotional or mental health. Why you don't talk about it? Is it because of stigma? Is it because you feel weak, or you think you'll be seen weak to other people? Or is it your career prospects? I get 318 views within about an hour, but only 3 people actually put in on it. And yet the votes on it, but I got a lot of ones DM'd me, said they wouldn't put it on it for that particular reason. They're worried if they tick any of them, people associate that with them, even though it might have been they were saying it because they see other people. So we still have this education piece that needs done. Or the right ones, the 20%, are not going to open up to anyone if they're still worried about that in a corporate environment.
And this is kind of rings true with what Siobhan and I have been doing with APA and the positive framework for mental health, which just before Easter was published to ministers both in Scotland and in London. And part of that is the kind of reworking of mental health into emotional well-being. Mental health has had its day. It had its day long before this century started. It has to be work. We have to understand that our emotions and our thoughts equal our actions. And if we don't put those things in the right sequence and only focus on one part, which is the physical, then we are going to keep having the same problems, right? Yeah. So that's step one. But there is already, a proposal in place in both Edinburgh and in London where that is exactly as you say, Tony. That's what needs to happen. but also for employers who are looking at what they are being told and the tick boxes that they are given around this topic of mental health, which hasn't worked. We know it hasn't worked because otherwise we wouldn't be having the conversation. What do they do instead? And what Siobhan and the team and I have suggested that we need employers to understand that all of us need to think about our brain in the same way we think about our bladder.
Yeah.
When our bladder is full, if we don't empty it, it goes toxic and it can kill us. If our brain is not emptied, guess what? It goes toxic and it can kill us. So we created the idea of a pre-crisis intervention support system for the brain. PISS, for the brain. So employers can get their staff to say, I need to take for my brain in the same way that we do for our bladder. And then you've got people engaging with the idea that they can actually go and have a conversation, they can have time out, they can do whatever that pre-crisis intervention needs. And it's not in-house. It's not the HR manager that's sat there going, oh, you can come and talk to me because I've done mental health first aid. I don't care if you've done mental health first aid and you're HR. You're HR. I do not want you to know anything. Thank you very much. And when we've seen this in action overseas, they get more engagement with their staff. They get more productivity with their staff because they can hit a button and say, the company is going to pay $50 for me to go and speak to somebody at the end of this week. It doesn't cost that company $17,000 to replace that member of staff because they paid $50 in order for them to have that time out. And that's what we've got to be getting to, is finding ways where businesses can engage with this in a way that isn't crisis management, but it's crisis avoidance.
There's two things there, though. Again, it comes down to money and the idea of false economy. Save now and pay later is what actually they're doing. They're just paying with a different currency to a certain extent. But also the idea of going to someone who's, I've done a course on mental health first aid, and I'm supposed to be listening for this word, I'm supposed to be listening for that word, and if they don't look like that, there's nothing wrong with them.
I'm going to stand up and say, actually, that's not what the mental health first aid course is. There's a little bit more.
I know, but what I'm actually saying is that
when it's in-house, it makes no difference.
Absolutely.
What I'm actually saying is that it's what people hear, not what people say. It's what they hear is what they will deal with.
It's a lot to do with terminology.
Yeah.
After I retired, went into corporate security, had to deal with a lot of different companies. The company I worked for was, we'll save $50 because that's $50 saved. They wouldn't even contemplate the 100,000 at the end of it. And the same was true of the organisation I dealt with, suppliers, etc. Right? Mental health first aid. Mental, big question mark against that one. You're mental, by the way, right? As a pejorative negative state, mental. Health implies, what's the opposite of health? Sickness. First aiders. You'll need a first aider if you're not well. So then we have 4 words. Mental health first aider. I'll send you to the mental health first aider. No, you fucking won't, because there's nothing wrong with me. Right?
And the other challenge with that as well is that the people that were put on the courses, in most cases that I'm aware of, were the managers. You're not going to go and talk to your line manager about how you're feeling.
Well, I was a mental health first aider with the bank before I left to set my own business up. And one of the reasons I did leave is because I got frustrated that, we went on a 2-day course with Mind, and I didn't understand why not. So I went to Scotland, I had to be done in South to do it. I went to Mind to do it with the rest. And the lady was lovely. The course was all right, but there was no detail on it. It was a lot of stuff thrown at you, then talk to each other as if you're practicing something like a role play, but there was no real scenario to it. And then that's okay. There was no exam. There's nothing at the end of it to say you now able to go and work with someone. And you're a first aider. you had to do tests to pass an all first aid course. Make sure that physically you could do something where you don't do that with mental health one. And I hate the word mental health when I said this, but the other thing got me as well is it really gets in-house, and I agree with Dave. What really got me was that when I was told to do it, it was great. Yeah, I was a manager, but some of the other ones were, we did have people off lower work managers that if they preferred, someone could go to one of them. But what got me was when we started one about time, how long they were actually with you. And then you're told, wait a minute, if it's going to be that length of time, they need to either go back or maybe make a decision on somewhere because you're taking too long at your job. That's what Dave's meaning, because it was out of my job to deal with this thing. So the pressure was, how are you doing your job? Someone else is having to cover for you or do something while you're away doing that. So that was an aspect of it, and that's when it's all wrong if it's in-house.
And this is where the pre-crisis intervention support system that Siobhan and I have been working on really comes into play, because it is that going to a qualified professional for that single session that you are going to be able to get appropriate and effective decisions about support afterwards. And if the company is only doing that part, that's their only criteria. It's literally, you give that employee a voucher that says, you go and have your single session. That individual has got a starting point on making sure that they can cope with the situations that they are facing in a way that is appropriate for them, not appropriate for the company, not at the company's bequest, but it saves that company. And this comes to Leslie's point about creating the false economy, or living the false economy that they currently do, is when that member of staff collapses and burns out, that company not only has to replace them and the cost of that, but there's also the training that new employee has to go through to get to the same point that the member of staff that has left was at, right? And if your system is a hamster wheel of burnout, then you are going to keep paying that cost. And
this a challenge of that is which line on the spreadsheet is that? Because it could be that line on a spreadsheet is something completely different, and that's not tracked in the same way. So there's also that challenge of actually getting the businesses and the organizations to realize it's a joined up piece and not just a case
it's called business failure.
It all comes down to compartmentalization, and whether or not basically we realize that we come in parts, but we are not separate. We are a part of, not apart from, each of the parts that make us who we are and how we are. And basically, it's a case of, when we talk about overwhelm, we've all had it to a certain extent, one way or another. We all know what it is, but we all have different ways of dealing with it. There are similarities in some, and there are absolute diverse ways of doing things, and people would think, you do what? And that makes you feel better, how? But at the same time, this is it. The chimp paradox, the paradox of the whole thing is that we have to have the chimp brain, because that's where we started. However, what we did do was we evolved a frontal lobe, and then we evolved the computer, which is in the book, The Chimp Paradox. But at the same time, we cannot have one without the other, two being appropriate and in the mix. So we're going to go off and probably have a natter about how this went, and I'm going to say thank you very much, everyone, because I'm going to do the monkey see, monkey do, and I'm going to remember what I learned about Zoom and how to turn things on and off. So goodbye for this month, and if anybody's got any questions or would like to get in touch with us, we are all here. We are all working for you and waiting for you to come to us so we can help you stop the freeze and start the, ooh, I wonder what that key is and how it would work for me. So we'll see you again sometime soon. Bye.
Bye.